Archaeologists opened a 2,700-year-old coffin in the deserts of western China. Inside was a blue-eyed man, about 45 years old. He had been buried with a harp and a set of horse reins, along with nearly 1 kilogram of cannabis that had somehow remained green after 27 centuries underground. The tomb belonged to a shaman, and the cannabis was a farewell gift. Whoever prepared this man for burial made sure he had everything he would need for the afterlife. But he was far from the first person to use this remarkable plant. The story begins around 12,000 years ago. Somewhere in East Asia, people were just beginning to experiment with agriculture, and one of the very first plants they decided to cultivate was hemp. Imagine you are an ancient farmer who discovers a plant that can be turned into rope, woven into clothing, eaten as food, pressed into oil, and even used as medicine. This wasn't just mother crop. It was the ancient world's equivalent of discovering a Swiss Army knife arrowina out of the ground. One of the earliest written records of cannabis appears in an ancient Chinese text called the Pen Sao Qing, often described as one of the world's first medical handbooks. Traditionally attributed to the legendary Emperor Shen Nung, the book recommended hemp for treating everything from joint pain to malaria. From China, hemp spread westward along the Silk Road. Merchants carried silk, spices, and apparently cannabis as well. One of these trade routes crossed the Pamir Mountains of Central Asia, and this is where some of the earliest evidence of cannabis use has been discovered. High in the mountains at a cemetery known as Jirzhangkal, researchers excavated 8 ancient graves dating to around 500 BC inside. They found wooden braziers filled with charred stones that had been used to burn cannabis. And this wasn't just any cannabis growing in the region. It was exceptionally potent, far stronger than the wild varieties found nearby. These people deliberately selected the most powerful plants. They heated the stones, placed the cannabis on top, and as they buried their dead, everyone inhaled the rising smoke together. More than 2,500 years ago, cannabis smoke was already part of funeral ceremonies. Around the same time, a Greek historian named Herodotus traveled through Central Asia and encountered a nomadic people known as the Scythians. The Scythians were legendary warriors. They rode horses, carried bows, and apparently enjoyed ceremonial smoke sessions. Herodotus described how they set up small tents, threw hemp onto hot stones inside, and inhaled the thick clouds of smoke. He even wrote, "It gives off such a vapor that no Greek in Bath could surpass it." The Scythians shout for joy. Is it just me, or does he sound a little jealous? For centuries, historians believed Herodotus had exaggerated the story. Then, in 1947, Soviet archaeologist Sergei Rudenko excavated frozen Scythian tombs in Siberia that had remained sealed in permafrost for more than 2,000 years. Inside, he found the wooden tent frames, heated stones, and hemp seeds, exactly as Herodotus had described. He hadn't made any of it up. Then in 2013, another Scythian tomb was discovered in the Caucasus Mountains, containing 7 pounds of solid gold vessels. When researchers analyzed the residue inside them, they found traces of both cannabis and opium.
Cannabis and opium. Around 2,400 years ago, ancient people were already using these substances in golden vessels. Sounds unbelievable, doesn't it? But the most surprising discovery came 7 years later. Researchers examined the altars of a 2,700-year-old shrine from the ancient kingdom of Judah at Tel Arad in Israel. The first altar contained traces of frankincense, one of the most common offerings of the time. But the second altar told a completely different story. It contained cannabis. And it wasn't used alone. The cannabis had been mixed with animal dung. At first, that sounds strange, but there was a practical reason behind it. The dung slowed the burning process, allowing the smoke to be released gradually and consistently. Whoever prepared this mixture clearly understood exactly what they were doing. And here's what's even more fascinating. They weren't the only ones. Across completely different civilizations, separated by thousands of miles and hundreds of years, people kept discovering this plant and giving it an important place in their cultures. But why? The answer may actually be inside your own body. Your body naturally produces a molecule called anandamide, named after the Sanskrit word ananda, meaning bliss. THC, the main psychoactive compound in cannabis, can activate many of the same receptors. It's almost like a spare key fitting into a lock your body already had. Maybe that's why, on the other side of the world, people in India didn't simply use cannabis. They considered it sacred. One of India's oldest sacred texts, the Atharva Veda, lists cannabis as one of 5 sacred plants. One of Hinduism's most important gods, Lord Shiva, is often associated with bhang. Bhang is a traditional drink made from cannabis leaves, milk, and spices. According to legend, after swallowing a poison powerful enough to destroy the world, Shiva found peace again through bhang. What's remarkable is that nearly 3,000 years later, people still prepare the same drink during the festivals of Holi and Mahashivaratri. But the story doesn't end there. Around 200 AD, the famous Chinese physician Hua Tuo was said to give his patients a cannabis-based mixture before performing surgery. If the historical accounts are accurate, that would have been nearly 1,800 years before modern anesthesia. But being ahead of your time has always come with a price. Hua Tuo became the personal physician of the powerful warlord Cao Cao. But instead of remaining at court, he wanted to return home and treat ordinary people. Cao Cao took that as an insult. Hua Tuo was arrested, thrown into prison, and eventually executed. Before his death, he tried to pass all of his medical writings to a prison guard. The guard was too frightened to accept them, so Hua Tuo burned every page himself, and with those pages, his remarkable formula disappeared into history. But perhaps the most surprising story comes from Africa. According to historical accounts, a warrior community in the Congo eventually centered much of its society around cannabis. They called themselves the Benariamba, the Sons of Hemp. They even renamed their community Lubuku, meaning friendship. Their greeting was a single word, moyo. To them, it meant both hemp and life. The two were inseparable. Meanwhile, in Europe, cannabis served a very different purpose. Ship ropes, sails, rigging. Much of it was made from strong hemp fibers. In many ways, hemp became one of the silent materials that helped power the age of exploration. So when European settlers crossed the Atlantic, bringing hemp seeds with them wasn't making a cultural statement. It was simply practical. Hemp spread quickly throughout the colonies. But before long, everything was about to change. Now imagine something for a second. It's the 1600s. You're living in America. You have two choices, tobacco or hemp. Which one would you grow? The answer is pretty obvious, whichever makes you the most money. And back then, tobacco was far more profitable than hemp. So naturally, farmers chose tobacco. The government, however, wasn't happy about it. They kept saying, please, grow more hemp. The farmer's response? No thanks. Eventually, the government lost its patience. Fine, and they said, if you won't grow it voluntarily, you'll grow it by law. The farmers weren't just encouraged to grow it, they were legally required to. That's how essential it was. For the next 2 centuries, cannabis was simply a part of American life. But everything changed in 1930, when a man named Harry Anslinger became the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. He held that position for 32 years. Anslinger linked cannabis to Black Americans, Mexicans, and Filipinos. He claimed it made minorities forget their place. He also had a problem with jazz music. He argued that jazz was satanic and went after the musicians who played it. He personally targeted Billie Holiday, not because of drugs, but because she sang Strange Fruit, an anti-lynching protest song that made powerful people uncomfortable. He stopped calling it cannabis and started calling it marijuana instead. The word sounded foreign, and frightening the public was part of the strategy. He kept a file called the Gore Files, filled with fabricated police reports linking marijuana to violence and insanity. He asked dozens of doctors for their opinions. Most of them said cannabis wasn't dangerous. He ignored them all and listened only to the one doctor who agreed with him. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act was passed. In 1970, President Nixon placed cannabis in Schedule 1, the same legal category as heroin. A plant that humans had been cultivating since before they learned how to write was now legally considered one of the most dangerous substances on Earth. Now listen to this. Years later, Nixon's domestic policy advisor, John Ehrlichman, explained the entire situation in an interview. He said, the administration wanted to target 2 groups, anti-war protesters and Black communities. They couldn't make it illegal to be against the war or to be Black. But they could associate marijuana with one group and heroin with the other, criminalize both, and arrest whoever they wanted. That's not speculation. Those are the direct words of one of the people who helped create the policy. In 1988, the DEA's own administrative law judge, Francis Young, spent 2 years reviewing all of the medical evidence. He concluded that marijuana should not be classified alongside heroin. He recommended removing it from Schedule 1. However, the DEA rejected his recommendation and left the classification unchanged. Cannabis has been part of human life for approximately 12,000 years. It has been illegal for only about 90 years. That's less than 1% of its history. For nearly all of human history, this plant was simply a natural part of everyday life. People made rope from it in the morning and burned it during funeral ceremonies in the evening. One tribe built its entire way of life around it and greeted one another with a word that meant both hemp and life. And that shaman in the desert, with his harp and nearly 2 pounds, about 900 grams of cannabis. He knew nothing about drug schedules or political agendas. He simply knew that this plant was worth preserving, and the people who loved him made sure he would never run out.